We live in a time where masculinity is shamed and men don't know what it means to be a man. As a pastor and counselor, I've spent the better part of my life equipping and training others. My goal with this show is to translate my hard-earned experience into tools and tactics to help you become stronger as a man. This is the BraveCo podcast. I'm your host, Jason Vellet. All right, BraveCo men, welcome back to the BraveCo podcast. I've got a real treat this week. I've got a guest by the name of Bryan Rucker, and he has an incredible story of just overcoming so many obstacles and even being a part of the DUCK DYNASTY family. And he's just such a cool guy. He's just overcome so much. And so right now, Bryan is a director of the Celebrate Recovery for Whites Ferry Road Church. And he's a counselor and a therapist and owns his own sober living program. Is just such a cool dude, saving guys from the pit of hell, helping them break out of addiction. And I'm really excited to hear Bryan's story and then dive into how other men can find help. So Bryan, thanks so much for coming on today, man.
Hey man, I really appreciate y'all having me for sure. It's exciting to be able to share the good news of Jesus and to be able to do stuff like this with you guys, man. I've been looking at some of y'all's stuff and it's really good.
Thanks, man. I appreciate that. Hey, why don't you take us through how you grew up and what your childhood was like?
Yeah, so I grew up on the north side of Houston, Texas. I grew up in an all-black neighborhood. So I used to have to fight before I got on the bus, when I was on the bus, and when I got off the bus, until eventually I was just another kid in the neighborhood. And the first time I seen someone get shot, I was 9 years old, and it kind of put a lot of stuff into perspective for me. Which now that I'm a counselor, I realize that those are realities that you don't need to try to process at 9 years old. But, I used to watch these shows like Family Matters, Full House, and stuff like that. And, you would see just, this happy-go-lucky family, people sit together at the dinner table and things like that. And I would, be in my neighborhood and then there in the 2-bedroom apartment that we lived in the projects. And I'm like, man, that's just not real. And after that shooting happened, I came to the reality that like you can die at any moment. And so everybody that I was around, I didn't have my father in my life. It was just my mom and my grandmother. So everybody that I was around were gang members and drug dealers. And so naturally that's just what I wanted to be. And I kind of felt like it would help protect me, help me fit in and everything else. So by the time I was 11, I'd started smoking weed, selling weed. By the time I was 12, I was selling crack cocaine. And at 12 years old is whenever I got jumped into a gang. And so that's kind of just to give a little bit of, a description of what life was like for me growing up. I mean, that's the environment that I was raised in. And so, yeah.
Man, that's wild. How did that end for you? I mean, how did you get to a turning point in your life?
Well, so, whenever I was 13 years old, my mom, she went into the hospital for tumors and she ended up being in the hospital for almost an entire year. They would go in, remove a tumor, and then another one would develop. And then they would go in, remove that tumor, and another one would develop. And she ended up being in the hospital almost for an entire year. On one of the last surgeries that they did, they ended up sewing her back up with one of the towels that you wipe up blood with in the operating room inside of her. And so it caused a foreign body infection. I remember going to the hospital, seeing her hooked up to these tubes, them just pumping this fluid out of her. And they inevitably sent her home. And a week later, it was December 18th. I was just going outside, hanging out with my friends, selling little bags of weed. And my mom kept wanting me to watch this movie with her. It was Chicken Run. It was like a claymation movie. And I didn't want to watch that movie. And the whole day she would ask me, "Hey, will you watch this movie with me?" And I was like, "Yeah, yeah, I'll be back." And then I'd come in later and she's like, "Hey, the movie's coming on. Are you going to watch the movie?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'll be right back." Well, on one of the last times that I came in, I remember hearing her snoring. And so I thought to myself, good, I ain't got to watch that stupid movie. And I come back in for the night and I just go to sleep. And the next morning, I went to wake her up and she had passed away that night. So
Oh my
when I was
gosh.
13, I found my mom dead. And, I remember being sad for very, very short period of time, only a couple of minutes. And then immediately turned to anger. I remember the paramedics came and set me down and they said, "Hey, we're sorry to tell you that your mom passed away." And all that did was make me angry because I felt like, man, I know that. Like I found her. And anybody that tried to come and console me and things like that, I just didn't want anything to do with. And so I spent a very long time extremely angry. And growing up in the environment that I was in, being a part of a gang, selling drugs and everything, um, it was just a recipe for disaster. And so I ended up getting my first gun, a few months later, and I decided I'm going to commit a robbery. That ultimately lands me in juvie for the first time. I'm still
Wow.
13 years old at this point. They sent me to TYC for an aggravated robbery charge. Supposed to do 9 months. They kind of shunned me a little bit of grace because of my age and different circumstances. And I was supposed to do 9 months in TYC, which is Texas Youth Commission, basically prison for people under the age of 17. And I go in there and I start a gang and all kinds of stuff. I've just, God gave me the gift of being able to talk to people and to lead men. And I've never been the biggest dude, the baddest dude, or anything else, but I just always had this ability to rally people together, whether it was for good things or it was for bad things. And so
Wow.
I started this gang, and I turned my 9 months into 2.5 years. So then I'm locked up from the age of 13 to 16 years old. Um, I get out when I'm 16, and I had made some connections with people while I was in there that was able to get large quantities of marijuana and cocaine. And, I get out with all these ideas of, oh, I'm going to go to high school and get a diploma. I'm going to get a job and everything else. And that just doesn't last. It doesn't work out. And, less than 2 weeks later, I'm back to selling drugs. And with those new connections I had, it's just throughout my life, I've had this theme where I'll start with this one little idea and it just kind of blows up into something that I definitely didn't anticipate. So before I know it, I'm going down to the valley, which is, southern Texas, just before you get to the Mexican border. It's what we call the valley. And, I'm picking up large quantities of marijuana and cocaine, and I start putting them on the interstate. And that just kind of blew up into a whole thing. And, we don't have the time of day to really describe what all comes along with that. But to kind of put it in perspective, we started making upwards of $60,000 a month selling drugs, had a pipeline from Houston to Columbia, South Carolina. And I'm not even 18 years old yet. You know what I mean? I'm 16, just turned 17 years old. And, it's like, man, there's two sides to that coin. There's the stuff that people see in the movies and the music videos and songs like, oh yeah, you're selling all these drugs. So there's cars, there's women, clothes. And yeah, that is a part of it to some capacity. But the reality of it is, you don't really see much of it because there's so much chaos and madness going on at all times.
Hmm.
And so you're kind of just in this, like, you're stuck in this survival mindset, always watching your back, always worried about what's going to happen or if we're going to get jammed up or something. And so, it really, there's not a whole lot of benefit, people hear, oh, $60,000 a month selling drugs. Well, man, there's not a whole lot of benefit to that, really, when you boil it all down. And so, just like anybody else operating on that level, it doesn't last long. Whenever I was 17, in 2007, I ended up getting arrested for a gang-related shooting in which a person died. And I ultimately, go to jail for it, was convicted and then fought the charges for another 3 years on appeals. So then inevitably beat the charges. But, just that situation in general is something that really messed my head up because,
Yeah.
I'm 18 years old. The state of Texas says, hey, you're going away for life. I'm sitting there trying to wrap my mind around that, realizing, man, I ain't never been in love. I've never worked a real job. I've never done anything other than be locked up and like just see all this chaos around me. I lost my mom. I never knew my dad. I did have my grandmother in my life and she was there for me. She always looked out for me. But, now I'm going away for the rest of my life. I'll never see her again, because that's always the fear when you get incarcerated is like,
Yep.
well, people are going to die when I'm in here. And so, beat the charges, a few years later, end up getting released. And, I'm right back in the same neighborhood I was at where the shooting took place, my neighborhood. And, as soon as I get there, the cops, hem me up and they tell me, hey, no matter what we got to do, we're going to get you off the streets. You were never supposed to get out. And I really felt like they were either going to set me up or kill me. And so I knew I needed to get out of Houston. I get with this girl that I used to mess with. She's telling me that she just had a daughter and she's getting ready to move, away from, the city of Houston. And I pretty much just, hatch on to that and, start moving further and further away from Houston, thinking that that's the answer. And for the next several years of my life, that's what life consisted of, was basically move somewhere, work a job, get laid off, move somewhere else, work a job, get laid off. And I eventually land in East Texas and I'm working at like a chicken express. Me and her had split up. We had, had my son. I'm just thinking, okay, well, as long as I don't sell drugs or do anything like gang related, then, I could be a father to my son. And sure enough, I get laid off from that job at Chicken Express. And I'm like, man, screw it. I'm going to just like, it's my destiny to sell drugs. So I make a decision to go back to it. And around that time period, my grandmother had just gotten out the hospital and she was living here in Monroe, Louisiana, which is where my mom and my grandmother are originally from. And after I went to jail for the shooting, she kind of moved back here to Monroe, Louisiana. And so she had gotten out the hospital. It was around Christmas time. And so I decided to come out here and visit her. And I'm standing outside talking to my aunt, who I don't really know that much. And they're telling me that they're going to put my grandmother in a nursing home because insurance wouldn't pay for someone to be with her at night. And, for whatever reason, I said, well, I'll move out here and take care of her. And,
Wow.
I knew that I didn't want to go back to selling drugs and I knew that I had already gone back to it. After I'd beat that shooting case, I really felt like if I ever went back to prison that they were going to hide me, like I would never get out. And I've never really been afraid of a whole lot. But the one thing I was afraid of was my son having a life like mine. Because this dude is just like me, like in every way. He looks exactly like me. He acts exactly like me. And so I just didn't want him to ever have to feel the things that I felt or go through the things that I went through. And so I knew I didn't want to sell drugs. So I literally, I come back to East Texas. I give the drugs to my roommate, give him the keys to the apartment we were staying in, and load up and move to Monroe, Louisiana. And I was never a believer, man. Grew up totally atheist. I didn't believe in God. Even when I was incarcerated, people would like go to church service and stuff. I wouldn't go, and if I did go, it was to like exchange cigarettes or something. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I thought it was all pointless. I didn't believe in it at all. And so I get here to Monroe and, I start going everywhere looking for a job, and literally McDonald's and Taco Bell wouldn't hire me. Like I couldn't catch a break nowhere, couldn't find a job nowhere. I'm staying in this 1-bedroom apartment with my grandma at this retired living community. I'm not even supposed to live there. She's having to lie to the manager of the apartment saying, "No, he doesn't live here," but I'm like living there. And 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 I'm just driving down, one of the main roads here in West Monroe, it's Thomas Road, and I see this big brown building off to the right, and it's Duck Commander. And I say, well, you know what? I'm gonna go in there and put in an application. That way, whenever I'm telling people how I have to sell drugs because society won't allow me to get a job, I could say that I tried. And I go in there, put in an application. About another month goes by, and at that point, man, I was just so insane, like actively living inside the insanity. I mean,
Wow.
people talk about just being in this darkness, and man, it seemed like my entire life was consumed with just PTSD, all kind of like I didn't sleep at night, had insomnia, like just all this different stuff that I was trying to wrap around my mind. Um, and I would stay in my grandmother's restroom all night, just staring in this mirror, getting high and drunk, like trying to figure out like what's the point? Why am I here? Why did I beat that charge? Because I know the things that I've done, right? Like I know where I'm supposed to be, and I'm not there. Uh, am I just free to suffer? Like, what's the point in it all? And then I randomly get a phone call from this guy named Blaze Thomas at Duck Commander, and he asked me to come in for the interview. And I get there, and they're trying to figure out like how did I get there, and I knew that Blaze called me and everything, and I remember literally seeing one of the guys like open up the door to look in the area where I was sitting at, and just trying to like check me out, and I see him close the door and be like, I don't know who that guy is, you know what I mean? And so I go into the interview, and it's Blaze and another guy named Brad, who are, Brad's kind of working the warehouse. Blaze is there to kind of manage things. Because after Duck Dynasty took off, it was just mass chaos around there. There was a time period where if you had a pulse and could put together a duck call, they were hiring you. And then they had opened up the store because there were so many people just coming by to visit and everything like that. And so, it just kind of turned into this huge mess of just thousands of people coming by every day, them trying to manage it all. So then they got to this point where they had hired Blaze to come in and kind of like, hey, we can't just hire everybody because this isn't working. And so then they started just hiring, people that they knew in some capacity or like had, like a legitimate application, friends of the family, church family, stuff like that. And so there I am sitting in the interview, and they're like trying to fill me out. They're like, hey, if you got the job here, how would you like that? And for whatever reason, I told him, man, I'm going to be honest with you. I don't really care if it's you or McDonald's. Like, I'm just trying to feed my kid, and I don't want to sell drugs and do it. And he was like, okay. I've never heard that before. You know what I mean? And then, he goes, well, if you get the job, when could you start? And I, I stood up and I untucked my shirt and I said, man, I'll start right now. You don't even have to pay me. And, he was like, all right, man, well, we'll call you. And he pretty much like kicks me out the office, and so I like go back to my grandma's apartment and I'm like kicking myself. And, it's like when keeping it real goes wrong. Like I'd have told these people I sell drugs. Like there's no point. They're not calling me. Um, and a couple of days later, they end up calling me. I missed their phone call 5 times. They kept calling me, and ultimately was like, "Hey, if you want the job, you could start Monday." And so I started that next Monday, folding clothes for $8 an hour up there, Duck Commander. And I just went in there and I just went to work. Yeah, I just went in there and went to work, man. And I wasn't like, I didn't care who anybody was. It didn't phase me at all. I was just like, just trying to work a job. I think the first time I met Willie, like he walks in and he goes, "Hey man, I'm Willie Robertson." I said, "Oh, cool." And I just went back to working. Like I didn't pay him any mind. And, people started asking questions like, man, who is this guy? So one of the guys comes in and he says, "Hey man, you know, where are you from?" And so then I've always been pretty open. I'd tell them where I was from and, kind of what I've been through, not knowing that I'm giving them a testimony at the time. Just kind of, hey man, this is who I am, cause it was pretty obvious I wasn't from around there. And so, they were, I tell them where I come from and they're like, man, like, how'd you get a job here? Who'd you know? And I said, I didn't know anybody. I just put in an application and y'all called me. He goes, I didn't think we did that anymore. And so come to find out, one of the Buck Commander guys, as a prank, they had this stack of applications on one of the desks in one of the offices of just applications of fans that would come by. Like I said, there was thousands of people coming by every day, and they sometimes ask for an application, and so they let them fill out an application, and then they take the applications and just kind of set them on this desk, and it's just people that probably aren't local, that they're not really, there's not a whole lot of motivation to call or anything like that. And as a prank, one of the Buck Commander guys randomly pulls an application out of that stack and puts it on Blaze's desk of people that, knew somebody that they were going to call. And that was my application. And so after they hear that, they're like, "Oh man, you're here for a reason." And I'm like, "Bro, don't come at me with no Jesus stuff. Like, I'm not sure. Like, I'm just trying to work this job, And man, they said 3 words to me that were very revelating. And it's stuff that people hear all the time. And it might sound cliche sometimes, but honestly, man, like they said, "Hey man, it's cool. We love you." Right. And it was them saying, "We love you," that just did something to me, these dudes never opened up a Bible. They never pointed to any verses. They never told me that because of all the stuff I did that I better turn to Jesus or else, I'm going to hell. Like it was never none of that. It was just like, "Hey man, we love you." And they seen talents and gifts in me that I didn't necessarily realize I had. And they started giving me more and more responsibility. Next thing you know, I'm running this little concession stand basically for Willie. And, then they're like, "Hey man, can you sell stuff?" And I'm like, "Man, I've been selling stuff all up and down the Gulf Coast my whole life." And they, and so they're like, "Can you sell this coffee?" Like, cause we don't, we need to sell this coffee. And I was like, "Man, give me a display of that coffee." And it was called Willie's Watering Hole. And I said, "I'll bet you I outsell the store in coffee over here at this concession stand." And they did. And I outsold the store in coffee. And so they were just like, "Man, this dude's got something." And they all just took a liking to me. And, So, of course they're inviting me to church the whole time and I'm just like, yeah, whatever. Um, and then I finally, make the decision to go to church. And I remember thinking, okay, well, I'll go to church. They'll see me going to church. Maybe they'll give me a raise or something. Right. Like it was almost like I'm going to get in where I fit
Yep.
in. And,
Yeah.
so I go to church the first time and I'm sitting there and I'm listening and I'm kind of like, yeah, whatever, pastor's probably driving a Mercedes or something, just all the stuff. And then I leave, I go back to work that Monday and, I remember thinking like, okay, cool. I ain't got to do that again. Surely everybody saw me. Well, people saw me, but when I got to work Monday, didn't nobody say nothing about it. You know what I mean? Like it was never like a, hey man, we've seen you there, so I was like, crap, I gotta go again. And so I went again and then I went again. And the more I went, the more I listened. And everything that didn't make sense made sense if I put God in the equation. I used to base my
Wow.
life on science and logic. Scientifically, I should be dead. And logically, I should be in prison the rest of my life. And
Yeah.
I never could make that mathematically or logistically add up in my head. And it literally drove me insane. And the only thing that has ever made it make sense to me is if there's a God and he has a plan and a purpose. And so, I'm still hard headed though, right? So I'm like, okay, all right, I'm starting to believe God. If you're real, show me. And I'm going to open up this Bible here and I'm going to read about you. And if you're real, I'll know. And surely, man, I started opening it up, and I started reading and it was like God was revealing himself to me in the way that a loving father would, right? Like not in this
Mm.
condemning, way, just in these scriptures of, my favorite scripture, Romans 8:38 and 39. There's nothing, high or low, angels or demons or anything else in all of creation, that'll be able to separate you from the love of God that's in Christ Jesus. And it's like, wait a minute. Okay. And so, ultimately make a decision about a month later to get baptized by Phil. And, that's how I came to know Jesus. And, there's, it was like 0 to 100 real quick. It was like one day I'm, working, just selling duck calls and selling coffee and stuff. And next thing I know, I'm leading devotionals and people are flying me all over the place to tell my testimony. And they'd started using me on the show, started doing a lot of work with Buck Commander and going on hunts and things like that. And it was like, I don't want to say it was too much too quick, but I definitely
Mm-hmm.
didn't have a grasp of how to walk an authentic life out with Jesus.
Yeah.
I still thought in my young adolescent Christian mind, oh, well, grace abounds, he knows my heart. So yeah, even though I'm still smoking a little bit of weed, sleeping around with these women and, having a few beers, like he knows I'm out there doing the work for him. He knows that I love him and I got him in my heart. And so I got into this space where I was almost living this like double life. But,
Yeah.
honestly, at the time, I just didn't know. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I really didn't
Yeah.
know. I thought that, this like, oh, it's all good, man. Don't worry. You got Jesus. You're in. You know what I mean? Like, uh, and so, and so, yeah, I end up getting arrested again 3 days before my episode aired on Duck Dynasty. For a DWI and a possession charge. And I'm sitting in jail and I'm like, man, how did this happen? I got Jesus, like what am I doing sitting in here? And it was a whole different experience, man. Like so many of the sheriff's officers or sheriff's deputies would like come and do details for us at Duck Commander. So I had made relationships with them and I'm sitting in the holding tank and they see me and they're like, what are you doing? And I'm just like, you know, and I'm just having these thoughts in my head, and it's kind of like, well, and then it just hits me. It's like, man, God, you're going to really make me change. Like, this isn't something I could just talk about. This isn't something that I could do from 9 to 5. Either I'm for you or against you. Like, there's no real gray area. In that moment, it became highly evident to me that, hey, what you're doing isn't what I want you doing. And then my next thought was, well, this is all pointless anyways. Like, I done ruined everything. And to my surprise, one of my mentors, Grant Taylor, who's the general manager of Buck Commander, at the time, and then Willie and everybody, they came, got me out of jail, let me keep my job. They just told me to sell my vehicle because I didn't have a driver's license. I wasn't supposed to be driving anyways. and move into a Celebrate Recovery home and start working the Celebrate Recovery program. And that's how I got to CR, and that came with its struggles and everything else. And but whenever I finally got to a place to where I was done trying to make things about me, I was done trying to run the show, and instead I just said, you know what, God, I know that I gave my life to you, but I didn't give my mind to you. I didn't give my actions to you. I didn't give my thoughts to you. But whenever I made a decision that, like, I'm going to give everything to you and have the faith to humble myself and to walk through a process that I don't even know how this is going to pan out. I really felt like that's where I needed you to be. And it was through that I'd lost a lot of things. I ended up getting fired from Buck Commander. Luckily, Willie was willing to keep me on a Duck Commander to help out there and run some tours for people, because I'd been on the show and I was pretty much desperate because I'd screwed everything up. And man, they just kept showing me grace. They kept showing me love. They showed me accountability too. I think a lot of times people, whenever they're trying to disciple someone, they're a little bit afraid to set firm boundaries and hold them accountable. They just want to shower them and cover them in grace, which is true. But, grace and love sometimes means grace and tough love. And that accountability was really helpful for me, and me getting to where I'm at. And, so I started going all over the place speaking again, started doing stuff with Buck Commander again. I was living in this sober living home. I was literally on a TV show, working for Buck Commander, going on hunts with professional athletes and country music stars. And then I would come home and go live at a sober living house with a bunch of other drug addicts and alcoholics. And I ended up being there for 2 years, worked my way back up at Duck Commander, everything like that. And I went to speak at this treatment center, and they said, hey, man, I heard you speak for 30 minutes. I think you would be a great counselor. And I was like, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. I was like, I'll never do that. And they said, well, we'll pay for, you to get your credentials and stuff. And I was like, yeah, not interested, And I go back and I tell the guys at Duck Commander about it, and they're like, man, are you sure that's not a good idea? I mean, it feels like something God wants you to do. And I was like, nah, man, my future's here. This is it, And those guys love me so much that they were like, man, I don't know, like, yeah, you are family, you have a job here, but it seems like something that God wants you to do. Actually, Willie was the one that told me that. He said, man, look, your family, you always got a job at Duck Commander. He said, go try it. If it works out, great. If not, whatever. What do you got to lose? It just seems like something God wants you to do. And so I went, and turns out God's got a better idea about things than I do. That ultimately led to me being one of the most sought after addiction counselors in the state. Wow. From there, just a lot of blessings have come. The sober living houses that I lived in for 2 years, I now own that program. And we've expanded it out. I had the opportunity to share through I Am Second, have the White Chair film, which has been a huge blessing. Still just having those guys in my life to disciple me, mentor me, and guide me, and really take me into their family. I don't really have family, but those guys have taken me into their family. And, through something like Duck Dynasty and just, Buck Commander and the different relationships that I have with all that, it's really given this platform for me to be able to go and share the gospel with people. And so I've preached everywhere from Hawaii to North Carolina and everywhere in between. And, what I tell people all the time is I don't really got a whole lot of plans. I'm basically just tilling the field. God puts it in front of me and he says, steward it to the best of your ability. That's what I do. Just putting one foot in front of the other, and whatever God's got for me, I'm going to do it to the best of my ability. And
Gosh, man.
so, now I'm full time here at the church. This is where my office is. I'm the director of Celebrate Recovery now, which is, I never thought I needed Celebrate Recovery. I told the guys up there. They said, "Hey, man, I think you should go to CR." And I said, "Man, what are you talking about?" I said, "I'm a drug dealer, not a drug addict." And they were just like, "I don't know, man," But so here we are, and I'm just on this journey with Christ, and try not to live for this world, but for what He's got next in heaven.
Gosh, man, what a crazy story. It's man, it's so inspiring and just so crazy what God can do with a life surrendered, no matter what we've done, no matter where we started, the cards that were dealt. And I think so many guys forget that, right? Like so many guys look at their life and it's so easy to get down, right? About the cards that you were dealt. I mean, as a kid, you were so powerless to the environment that you were raised in. You didn't get that choice. And your mom dying and, not knowing your dad. But it's crazy. Like, it really is so crazy what happens when you surrender your life to a God who loves you and who cares for you. Like, that's why your testimony is so powerful, is it gives hope to every person that feels like they have an excuse, of, it feels like they're a victim. And because really, like at a lot of places in life, you are a victim and you have to decide to be powerful. Like, your story is so incredible, man. That's amazing.
Yeah. What I tell people a lot of times is, I think God is perpetually trying to get us to convert our burdens into blessings. So the things that once hurt us and hindered us into things that help us. And I think that that's how God kind of uses everything to His glory. I mean, you go back and you search, the Bible and all these different bastions of faith that we have. Man, these dudes were jacked up individuals, right? These were not the like, oh man, that dude there, yeah, we know he's going to do great things. No, they were like, that guy, no way. You know what I mean? And, I like to tell people too, I didn't have this burning bush moment. I didn't have a road to Damascus moment. I wrestled with God like Jacob did. I was like, man, if you're real, you're going to have to show me. And I was hard headed and fought it every single time. But man, there's no mountain he won't climb up, and there's no lie he won't tear down coming after you. And if you just shift your positioning towards him, he's going to meet you where you're at every single time. And, kind of one of the things that I really try to help people to do, especially whenever I'm working with them, through counseling or in our houses, is to really get down to those core beliefs. You talked about, the cards you was dealt, right? And, your beliefs will give you your perspective. Your perspective will give you your thought process. Your thought process will bring you to your actions and behaviors. And then your actions and behaviors will determine the life that you have. So if you at the core believe that these are the cards I was dealt, this is all I'll get, well, then I begin to perceive the world like somebody that's limited and unable. If I perceive the world
Yeah.
like somebody limited and unable, then I begin to think like a victim. If I think like a victim, then my actions are ones that just help me get by or survive, my self protector. And then my life is ultimately a limited version of what it can be. However, the vice versa of that, the other side of the coin is if I believe that no matter the cards I was dealt, that Jesus is going to do a new thing and he puts new wine in new wineskins and he is always going to bring the things that he starts to completion and that he's got a plan for me and a purpose for me, then I begin to perceive the world like somebody that can be victorious because Jesus is already victorious. And if I perceive the world like somebody that is coming from victory and not trying to get to it, then I begin to think like somebody victorious. If I think like somebody victorious, my actions have kingdom implications, and then I live a kingdom lifestyle. And so,
It's great, dude. Come
it's
on,
just
man.
kind of one of those things.
I love it. Just in closing, like, I know there's a lot of guys that, are part of BraveCo that also will listen to this and they're either stuck in, addiction or, just coming out of it. Like, what's your advice for those guys? Just, real quickly.
Community's the make or break component for people that get sober and stay sober. Don't try
Yeah.
to fight this battle alone. Reach out to people and get honest and authentic about how you feel, right? I think Jesus gave us a very clear example of this in the Garden of Gethsemane, right? He says, my soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Stay here and keep
Yeah.
watch with me. He goes over and he puts his face to the ground and he prays earnestly to God. And he says, Lord, if there's any other way, take this cup from me, but thy will be done. And then he comes back and when you see him get up from that prayer, he's almost like resolute. And I think that there's three things that he does there that anybody that is struggling can start doing today. And that's first, he tells some people how he's feeling and he asks them to stay with him. So that community aspect, he gets real and he says, hey, this is what's going on with me. And we're talking about the Messiah, right? And if he
Yeah.
felt it was necessary to tell some dudes, hey, I'm suffering, I need you to be here with me, I think we can do that too, right?
Yeah.
And then what he does is he says, Lord, if there's any other way, take this cup from me, but not as I will, as you will, right? So he prioritizes his faith over his feelings, right?
Yeah.
Prioritizes his purpose over what's going on. And so whenever you reach out to people and have community, they can kind of help put that into perspective. Sometimes the way a person feels drives them to use alcohol or drugs. And if you can somehow not base your next actions off of how you feel, but rather what's truly important, your purpose, then that tends to put things in a better perspective. And then the last thing that Jesus does in that is he pours out his feelings to God, his heavenly Father. And so get some community, get around people, tell them what's going on with you. Then prioritize your purpose and what's important over how you feel, and go ahead and hit your knees and pour it out to God because he's going to be waiting for you and listening.
Gosh, man, that's such a good word. Bryan, you are a good man. And, I love what you're doing. I love, just the ownership that you've taken in your life and taking that leap of faith to, jump in and become a counselor and do something that, man, you didn't necessarily have in your heart from the beginning, but God said, hey, this is what I got for you. Like, that's super cool, man. And, yeah, it's a privilege to have you on the podcast today. And just that testimony, right, is that spirit of prophecy that goes out to every other man, where they get to look at you and say, if God will do it for him, he'll do it for me. And so I'm just praying today that even guys that are doing good, right, that they would take that fuel, that momentum, that blessing that God did in your life and add it to theirs. So Bryan, thank you so much, man, just for your time and your story and your diligence and for pouring out on so many men, you know, that we'll never see, but you're in their life every single day, making a difference. Like, it matters, man. And I appreciate you a bunch, man. Thank you for coming on.
Hey, man, thank you for having me, man.
All right, BraveCo men, listen, this week, take a second, and I just want you to take a second and really pour your heart out to God. Make sure that you are connecting with him, that you are in that place where you're being honest with him and the community around you, and that you're growing your life and not hiding it, and let God touch the deepest places of your life. And so he can ultimately set you free and empower you. So if you enjoyed this podcast, would you please share it, like it, subscribe to the podcast, and leave us a review. It helps to spread the word so much. Otherwise, men, have an incredible week. We will see you next week on the BraveCo podcast. Stay brave, men. Hey guys, thanks so much for listening to the BraveCo podcast. If you like this podcast, would you please rate it, review it, leave us a great comment. And if you like this episode in particular, share it with your friends and family. That helps us to spread the word. Guys, stay brave. We'll see you next week.